Establishing central dominion immediately, the pawn advances to claim essential square control. Developing the knight opens avenues for piece activity and prepares to challenge central pawn control. Securing central space and challenging the knight's dominion immediately, white seizes the initiative. Opening the diagonal for the queen and bishop, while reinforcing the d-pawn provides a solid central structure. Developing the knight to its natural square, nc3, reinforces the central pawn and prepares for further pawn expansion, aiming for control of key squares. The queen's pawn advance strikes at the center, aiming to break open lines and initiate active piece play. Opening the center now sacrifices pawn structure for active piece play and potential attacking lines. Recapturing the pawn strategically reclaims central space, opening lines for your pieces. Developing the bishop here pins the knight, preparing to pressure black's central pawn structure and potentially gain a tempo on a future queen move. Developing the bishop here aims to prepare for castling and potentially challenge white's central control by freeing up the queen's diagonal later. Solidifying the center's pawn structure, white prepares for future kingside development and a potential queenside pawn push. Securing the king's safety now permits developing pieces to more active squares, anticipating pawn breaks. Developing the bishop to a more active diagonal aims to pressure black's kingside and prepare for potential central advances. Securing the knight's central post, this move quietly prepares for future queenside expansion. Rerouting the queen to c2 aims to support a queenside pawn advance and prepares potential pressure along the c-file. Relocating the rook to the open e-file offers potential for increased pressure and coordination, especially with the bishop pair aimed at the kingside. Deploying the knight to the king's flank aims to reinforce the central pawn structure and prepare for potential queenside expansion, while also offering flexibility for future piece development. Reclaiming central space and preparing a knight retreat to a more active square. Securing the monarch offers a tranquil moment before the tactical storm brews over the queenside. Solidifying the pawn chain, this maneuver prepares a potential queenside expansion and supports the d5 pawn. Initiating queenside expansion, white prepares to contest the open c-file and potentially exert pressure on black's queenside pawns. The bishop now eyes the kingside, aiming to participate in the eventual central pawn push or a potential attack. Securing the king's flight square, white prepares for a potential kingside pawn storm or a subtle repositioning of pieces. Reorienting the knight to g6 suggests a desire to improve its outpost square on f4 or potentially support a kingside pawn advance, though it sacrifices immediate central influence. Solidifying the center's pawn chain, f3 prepares for a potential pawn storm on the kingside while securing the e4 square. Rerouting the bishop to the side offers a defensive shield and eyes potential pawn breaks on the kingside. Repositioning the rook to the e-file aims to coordinate with its counterpart, potentially opening lines for a central pawn push or supporting a future kingside attack. The knight retreats, preparing to redeploy to a more active square on the queenside, perhaps the c5 outpost. Exchanging the bishop clears the dark squares for knight maneuvering. Recapturing the bishop reclaims material and prepares the rook to exert pressure on the newly opened central file. Repositioning the knight to the kingside offers improved defense and potential regrouping for an attack. Initiating a knight maneuver to the kingside, seeking to contest the central squares or potentially support a future pawn advance. Positioning the queen to pressure the kingside and prepare for a potential pawn push feels like a calculated gamble, aiming to exploit the slightly cramped black pieces. Consolidating the bishop's position prepares for a potential kingside attack and enhances pawn defense. Invigorating the knight's scope, this initiative directly targets black's slightly passive piece placement. Exchanging a bishop for a knight here simplifies the position, potentially easing the pressure on your kingside and creating avenues for piece redistribution. Shattering the bishop pair grants white a clear diagonal, though it invites black's rook to dominate the e-file. Reasserting pressure on the queenside, This maneuver aims to dislodge white's central control and exploit potential weaknesses. Unlocking the center now, white creates a dynamic imbalance, demanding black's immediate attention and potentially opening attacking avenues. A bold central break, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and inject dynamic play into the game. Reclaiming the central pawn unleashes attacking potential and improves your bishop's scope. Pivoting the rook to the open d-file asserts pressure and prepares for potential central breakthroughs. A bold pawn thrust, seizing the initiative and immediately cramping black's maneuvering space. The knight's journey to d5 aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and contest central squares, potentially forcing further concessions. Injecting a knight centrally aims to disrupt black's queenside ambitions and potentially exploit the open files. Seeking central space, black retreats the knight to reinforce the queenside while preparing for potential queenside expansion. Asserting influence on the d6 square now creates a nagging outpost and disrupts black's central pawn structure. Exploring that queen maneuver aims to escape the pin and potentially reroute through the queenside. Consolidating pieces around the d-file offers greater control, preparing for potential pawn advances or a breakthrough in the center. Seeking a pawn break, black repositions the knight to support the central advances and potentially eye the weak d-pawn. Shifting the queen to the king's flank initiates an aggressive probing, seeking imbalances by attacking the vulnerable knight and eyeing potential sacrifices. Reorienting the structure to potentially reinforce the queenside pawn majority, this prepares for a more flexible pawn advance. Unlocking the d-file pressure on black's structure, this exchange aims to simplify and exploit the weakened pawn chain. Doubling pawns on the d-file now seals the space for black's pieces, potentially hindering their development. Reinforcing the central pawn and eyeing the open c-file for potential pressure. Reclaiming the initiative on the queenside, this bishop maneuver aims to secure the advanced knight and potentially disrupt white's pawn structure. Fortifying the queenside pawn structure, this maneuver prepares a potential advance or offers a defensive rerouting for the rook. Preparing for a central breakthrough or a queenside expansion, this rook now seeks active squares. Unleashing the knight to a potent outpost, threatening mate and dictating white's response. Repositioning the rook to the open file aims to contest control and prepare for potential exchanges, indirectly reinforcing the central pawn structure. Exposing the black king with a sudden knight fork, creating immediate threats and forcing concessions. Retreating the king to safety feels timid amidst this tactical storm. Stronger options involve immediate counterplay on the queen side. Unlocking the e-file for the rook dramatically increases pressure on black's exposed monarch. Seeking a defensive outpost for the knight, preparing to reinforce the weakened kingside. Repositioning the rook to the third rank enhances pressure on black's somewhat exposed monarch. Seeking to activate the rook and challenge the open file, this move directly confronts white's intimidating rook on the third rank. Unleashing a knight's fury, this sacrifice cracks open the dark square weakness around black's king. A desperate attempt to disrupt white's menacing knight and potentially create counterplay on the queenside. Unlocking a forgotten diagonal and preparing to pierce the enemy's defenses. Seeking a dynamic escape, black repositions the knight to a more active square, ready to support the central pawns and potentially join an attack. Reclaiming that outpost, knight sharpens white's attack on black's exposed king. Reuniting the queen with the rook on the 7th rank aims to reinforce the central control and prepare for a potential kingside assault. Opening the kingside flank with g4 throws caution to the wind, creating a potential weakness that desperately needs to be addressed.